Ladies and gentlemen, we are back at Real Deal Talk, and we have an amazing guest today, Ann Yarbor. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something here. Ann came into my life very, very recently. What are we talking about here? Maybe a month or two at the most?
Yeah, about a month ago.
About a month ago. And you guys know how I'm doing it now. Like some people are scheduled ahead of time, but most of the people now I'm kind of letting it fly. And if God highlights someone to me on the fly, I'm like, they're coming in. So Leanne was on stage at Awaken Church about a month ago, give or take, sharing her incredible story. And I'm just going to plant the seed early so you stick around because this story is absolutely it's actually unreal to me, like, because look at her. She's a specimen of a woman. You would think she's in her low 30s, and I'm going to say this because of how incredible you look. She's 59, almost 60 years old. Take a look. If you're listening to this, you're going to want to put on the YouTube one so you can see the video, because she's extraordinary. She's amazing. So you would never think in a million years that this incredible woman struggled very badly with addiction. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what highlighted to me. It's like, whoa, look at her. You would never know. You would never know. And that's the ones I really want to highlight because they're going to the story's going to be that much more powerful. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So 59, looks like she's 29. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to get her on the show. I got to get her number. I never had met her before. And then the following week, I go to the El Cajon campus for the first time ever. And the reason why is because my guy Rex Crane was throwing down at El Cajon. So my buddy Jonathan and I said, let's go to El Cajon to follow Rex. Let's go watch him throw down one more time. And so I'm there, and I turned the corner, and I think it was either after I don't remember if it was before or after the service, and I literally run right into you.
Yeah, after the service, yeah.
After the service, I run right in. I'm like, are you kidding me? So then I knew it was meant to be. I said, that's it. You're coming on the show. I don't remember if I gave you a card and said, here's my podcast. I said, what did you think at that point? Who's this meathead? Like, what is this guy?
No, I thought maybe you had approached me before.
Oh, yeah? Was it at the conference?
I think it was at the conference, yeah.
It was, okay.
And then you gave me your card. So, no,
okay.
I didn't think you were. No, I don't. There's not very many people at church that I think are strange, so.
Nice. All right, so Leanne, let's get down here.
Okay.
Let's get down to business. I want to go back. You probably haven't seen much of my podcast, if anything at all, but I'd like to go back, kind of find out the grassroots of your family life and how it went there, and to see if, like, basically, see if what kind of childhood you had and stuff like that. So where were you born and raised?
So I was born in Orange County.
Okay.
I was born here in SoCal. My mother is an immigrant from the Philippines.
Oh,
so
really?
I can thank my mother for the great youthful skin that we have.
Yes.
So thank God for her. My father was a Marine Corps pilot.
Oh,
so
wow.
they met in the Philippines, and then they had me when I was a baby.
Yeah.
They had me. They had me back in 1963, so my mom was brought over here. And my parents were married for about 3.5 years. I was born, then my sister was born 2 years later, and then my father left my mom. And we were left in Orange County at the time. And I remember the day my dad left.
Yeah.
I remember that day vividly. I was 2.5 years old. My sister.
You remember that age?
I remember that day vividly to this day. Yeah, 50 plus years later, I remember that day, yeah. And so I think a lot of that has to do, and the reason why I bring that up is because I think some of the tragedies and experiences that you have as a kid are the reasons why some of us go through some of the things that we go through. You know, everybody's trauma is different. So for me, I remember that day vividly, and my sister was just a baby at the time. But so my mom was left to raise, 2 girls on her own. In the United States, and she'd only been here for a few years. We lived in Coronado, so my mom got a job on the base, and she worked as what do you call it? Like someone she's a civilian. She's a civilian, but worked on base.
Right.
So we weren't Navy.
Yep.
But even though my father was in the Marines, we didn't get any of those benefits or whatever. But my dad ended up flying for Continental Airlines. He was an airline pilot for years. Ended up marrying 5 times. My mom never remarried. Yeah, so we grew up in Coronado, and it was a great life. My mom did the best that she possibly could
Yep.
with 2 girls on her own. She was very strict, but
Tiger mom.
that's yep,
Tiger
yep.
mom.
She was very strict. And between myself and my sister, we were obviously we just had each other, and I was kind of the black sheep. I was always getting in trouble. I was extremely rebellious. I was I was a little bit of a troublemaker.
And so
Yeah.
go back though. Give me the how do you what do you remember when he left? What exactly memory do you have there?
I remember the color of the carpet. I remember where the fireplace was, the front door, and how I ran out in the street to go find my dad. And I remember watching his car drive around the corner. I was extremely close to my father. And even after my father left, he did always send child support. He was really good about that. He always came and on every birthday, for Christmas, he was there for every holiday. So he was in our lives a
Yeah.
lot. But there's something to be said about fatherless daughters. And even as much effort as he made to see us when he could, he was still not really part of my life, but I always had loved him and admired him from afar. I always felt like, but there's something that happens. There's a connection that happens between fathers and daughters that I never got to really experience, I'll get emotional because he passed away 2 years ago. My dad ended up moving out here to California. He lived in Texas. So when we were as kids, we always would go visit my dad in the summertime and at Christmas time in Texas. So, and then when I turned 18 years old, because I was getting in so much trouble at the time and with drugs and alcohol and all this stuff, my father decided to move me to Texas, making a geographical change or location would change me. Obviously, it didn't. I just brought my problems with me to Texas. But so I was able to get a little bit closer to my father at that time. But there is something to be said about girls that don't get to have a father present. And you can be a father to a daughter and maybe not even live in the same household but be a present father, and you can be living in the same household and not be a present father.
That's
There's
true.
something that's really important that I was missing, and that's one of the things that I always realized, and it was always lacking in my relationship with my parents. Obviously we need mom, we need dad, and dad just never was present. So I was always searching for that being valued or being looked at as someone that was appreciated by a male figure.
Yeah.
So I was always looking for that my whole life.
And so how did you know that like you said, you remember when he left, but did they make an announcement? Hey, Dad's leaving. Like, how did you even know he was leaving?
I just knew.
Really?
I just knew. My mother was crying, and I want to say I remember her saying, your dad's leaving, and which is why I ran outside the front door. But I just remember that. It's just really impactful in my life to remember such a traumatic,
Yeah.
time of my life. But I just remember how emotional my mom was, and I knew that something was wrong. So I just knew that he was leaving.
And so he didn't actually say, all right, bye.
No, he never said goodbye to us. He just took off in the car. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. And then, like, after that point, did he call? Well, I mean, you're obviously not really talking at that point because you're so young.
So, yeah.
What age do you remember talking to him on the phone and realizing that he...
It was probably a few years after that we didn't even really get to see my dad until I was 3 or 4,
Yeah.
and we went to visit him. He was stationed in Los Angeles at the time, and so we got to go and stay with him and his new wife.
Yeah.
And I just remember that I felt like a long period of time, but honestly, I think it might have been maybe a year or 2 years
Yeah.
before we were finally, in his life. And he made a point, and, I didn't know this at the time, obviously. These are things that were told to me later. He was always someone that, sent money, helped my mom, take care of us. But so he was trying to be present in our lives with finances and, showing up on special days and things like that. But still was, missing that dynamic of having mom and dad in the house.
And do you remember your mother? Did she date any more men at that point, or?
It took a long time for my mom to date. And I remember it wasn't until I was maybe in like elementary school that my mom did start dating she dated a few people, and then nothing serious. My mother always still loved my father, even to this day.
Wow.
And yeah, as a matter of fact, when he passed away, the night that he passed away, my sister and I were going to call and tell my mom. And I said, let's wait. So the next day, my sister went to tell my mom that my dad passed away. And before she approached my mom said, Rolf died last night, didn't he? And my sister said, yeah. She goes, I had a dream. He came to me. He was really young, and we danced and danced all night.
Wow.
She goes, it was so real. And then he asked her, some questions that only she would know what they were. So I believe my dad, did go meet the Lord. He was in his new body. He got to dance with my mom one last time, and
no kidding.
That was But she never remarried. She always loved my dad, and just never found anyone to take his place.
Wow. And so, like, what do you remember in like elementary school? Like you said, you were like the problem child, getting in trouble. Give me like what was going on. Let's say elementary school.
Well.
Or do you even remember?
I do remember a lot of my younger years. Elementary school was, I went to a predominantly white school. I went to Coronado, Central Elementary, then Coronado Junior High School to Coronado High School. And I remember being like the only ethnic girl or kid in school. And I remember teachers would point out that my mom was Filipino. But other than that, I had a few, I had friends and stuff, but I always kind of felt a little bit out of place because I was, half Filipino, half white, and most of my friends were all white. So it's just, I was never made fun of, but I was always treated, I felt like a little bit differently, and especially too because I was being raised by just my mom. All my friends had their mom and dad in the house, and I was this, little Asian girl with just a mom raising her in Coronado. And we certainly weren't a Navy family like the majority of the kids, and we certainly weren't rich like the majority of the kids in Coronado. We were probably the poorest people in Coronado, but other than that, I and like through high school and stuff, I had a lot of friends, and it's a small school, so I think being at small schools makes a big difference, as far as like how you're treated, and there's just not a lot of bullying going on. Although it was always made apparent to me that I was, I was different in a way.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is because when I got here, I was actually with the Navy. I started in Coronado in North Island.
Okay.
So what's interesting, what you're saying is, I would actually think that there'd be more Filipino,
right?
Because it's a thing.
It is.
White guys marry Asian women when they're on deployment.
They do.
It's a thing.
It is a thing, especially back in the 60s.
Especially back in the 60s,
Yeah.
the 70s, the 80s. It was a major thing. Like, it was the thing.
It wasn't until I got into high school that some of my friends were Guamanian. I had some Guamanian friends. I didn't really have any other Filipino friends. I was like, it was odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really odd. But, yeah.
But then again, Coronado is known as a very affluent area, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
maybe all the others were living like in National City. Or no offense to National City.
No, hey, that's where all my family is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sure.
Linda Vista.
Exactly.
Right?
Mostly
Mira Mesa.
National City. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, we call
that's
it.
so,
Yeah,
that's so
National
funny
City.
that I said that.
For sure. Yeah.
No offense, but let's.
No, it's true.
Yeah. Okay, so what point did things start getting like where you got into drinking, and what started first? Alcohol, drugs, experimenting?
Yeah. So, I definitely alcohol. Alcohol started off first. There were some other things that happened to me leading up to this
Tell me.
point too. So, at age 12, I was sexually abused by someone in my family, by a person who wasn't actually blood related to me, but had married into the family, and that scarred me for obviously a variety of reasons.
Wow.
Obviously, so, and I kept it secret. I was always shameful. I never told anybody because I was so afraid. I was definitely like groomed up to that point to where something actually happened to me, and I was made to feel like I would be, in major trouble if anybody were to find out. And so it was something that I kept secret for a long time and held in for a long time. And I didn't understand, and I always felt like it was my fault. I was made to believe that it was my fault for these things that happened to me, for this incident that happened to me. And I carried it through for my high school years. And so what alcohol did for me was, because sometimes I would feel like a little bit of an outcast, alcohol gave me that liquid courage. It would make me feel welcome. I felt like I fit in my skin. I started to feel like I was, I'd feel like the life of the party. I was, it worked. Alcohol worked until it didn't work, right? But that's later down the road. But in my community, it was just a normal thing. We would look for parties on the weekend, and we would drink on the weekends. We'd find ways to get Navy guys to go buy us. We'd call it a tap back then. So we go, hey, can you get us a tap? That's what we'd call it. So we would find, Navy guys to get us beer, and we would drink or whatever we could get our hands on. And so that's just something that we did. And the girls that I hung out with, a group of friends that I hung out with, that's just kind of what we did. And in Coronado, people would have parties, and you could just walk down the street and find someone having a party and just kind of crash parties. You never had to be invited.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of like what we did on the weekends. And it was, it was fun back then. Drinking was not anything that was an addiction to me at that time.
Right.
It was just something to help relieve the pain, to make me feel fit, to make me feel like I fit in, make me feel like I was part of the fun group. And so it worked.
And then, so you're saying that, and I'm going to go back to the quote unquote incident thing. You never told your mom about that?
Never told my mom. Never told anyone.
So this was somebody married into the family that was grooming you for what years, you said? 2 to 3 years?
Probably more like 6 to 7 months.
6 to 7 months.
Yeah. And that person is no longer in the family anymore. And wasn't after that incident. I would say probably maybe about 6 or 7 months after that had happened to me, he was gone and he left. And it was my cousin's husband. And I never told my cousin either.
Didn't?
No, I didn't tell anybody.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't tell anybody. I was so scared.
Now, let me ask you this, because he almost seems like, I'll say this word, like a professional, meaning he groomed you. So my guess is he did it to others.
I have prayed that didn't happen to other girls. As when he left, I had heard that he had started a new family, and it scared me that maybe he might have had a daughter. Because
grooming and making it seem like it's, like you almost felt like it was your fault, and grooming it so that you didn't tell anybody.
Right.
That's like, that's just doesn't seem like a first timer. You know what I mean? Like to be that cunning and conniving to be able to do that. You know what I mean?
I didn't tell anyone because I was just so scared.
Wow. And I wanted to go back to that, by the way, because I know that this is a topic, and thank you for sharing this, by the way. But I know that there's people listening and watching that have either gone through this or maybe even going through this right now, or maybe have a child in the family.
Yeah.
And so at what point did you think it was okay to tell somebody, or did you? How long did you wait?
Well, first I want people to know, and any women that are out there, even men that are out there that have something like this going on, that to know that it's not your fault, and to not be scared of the threats, but to tell someone. I wish I would have told someone when I was younger, and I could have gotten the help that I needed, and I could have got the counseling and the therapy that I needed to be able to deal with this. But I lived with this, because you don't want to live with this, what's going on, even if you think that it's something minor, or they're telling you that it's not a big deal. It's a big deal. It's always a big deal to be to be violated in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter how old you are or who it is. It's never your fault, and you are being you're being manipulated.
Yep.
So if there's someone out there that's listening, just know that you're being manipulated, and that pray and ask God to deliver the right person to you, to be able to go and talk to that person. But you will be safe once you tell the right person.
And that's so impactful right there, because most people don't tell, because they've been groomed to think that you're gonna be like in harm's way.
Right.
When in essence you're not, most likely, right?
Right.
People
right.
will come to your rescue and
they will.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, they will. But they plant the idea, and they plant the idea that you will be in trouble, that your family will be hurt, you will be hurt, that they will hurt you. So, and they will hurt, because they can hurt you. So what of what they're doing to you is hurting you, in a way. And if they can do that to you, then they can do that to anybody. They can even hurt you in other ways. So the idea of them, if they can go as far as to do the things that they're doing to you, then what's to think? What we believe as the victims is that, of course, they can hurt us even worse, right, and our family. And so it's not true, and it's just a way of manipulating you into believing something that won't happen. So just to get the help so that those people can. And I've known people, I've actually talked to someone who went through the same situation that I went through. She ended up telling her mom, and then that person ended up in jail. So
wow,
that's where you want to see that person. You want to see that person in prison for what they're doing.
And this this also it pertains to people in a marriage
Sure.
that are being abused.
Absolutely.
Abuse in any way.
100%.
Whether it's verbal or, hopefully not physical.
That's right.
But it's the same thing.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Oh, absolutely. I was married before my marriage to Brian. I'm currently almost 29 years married to
wow,
my current husband. But prior to getting married to Brian, I was married to another man who was physically abusive to me.
Oh, wow.
So exactly. And so what happens is you begin to believe this person, they'll hurt you, they'll beat you, and then they'll turn around and promise you the world, and make everything just sound so good. And we keep going back and forgiving them. And, it's very similar to alcoholism. Alcoholism will do this to you too. It's like an abusive relationship. And when you're used to an abusive relationship, you can, coming out of an abusive relationship, which was my first husband, and then alcoholism is the same thing. It treats you really good, and then it'll beat you to the ground, but then you just keep going back to it. You just keep going back to it over and over again. People ask why. Why do some women keep going in and out of these abusive relationships? Well, I can totally relate. I went in and out of an abusive relationship with alcohol,
yeah,
and drugs.
Yep. And so going back to how long the abuse with you said physical abuse?
Physical abuse, and mostly verbal abuse.
Okay.
With my first husband,
yeah,
but yes, there was times it was physical abuse. So.
And was it just because he'd apologize and say, I'm sorry, and then you'd, okay?
Well, yeah, and they put you in a situation where you feel like, at least in my situation, I'm not going to say this for everybody, but my situation was, I felt like this was the only way I was supposed to live, and that he was the only one I could ever have. I would never amount to anything. I was made to feel like I was way less than, and that this was the best life I was ever going to have, and he was the best thing that was ever going to happen to me. I didn't even feel worthy enough or good enough to even live. And this is when I lived in Colorado.
Yeah.
I didn't feel worthy or good enough to ever live back in California because I just wasn't good enough to live somewhere like California. That was literally what I thought, and what I was led to believe was this was all I had. I wasn't allowed to have friends. I wasn't allowed to do anything really on my own.
He didn't allow you to have friends?
No, I had no friends. I had no social life outside my marriage. I was just held sort of captive in my own home, and constantly, I could never do anything right. I could never clean right. I could never cook right. I could never do anything right. So I lived that way for 2 years. And then I had my first son. I got pregnant with my first child, my son, and then at 6 months pregnant, finally got up enough courage to leave. I lived in an abuse shelter, a women's shelter for about a month, and then my mother-in-law took me in, and she took me in under her wing to protect me from him. So I lived with her
from her own son.
From her own son, yeah.
She knew he was this bad?
She knew he was this bad. After a few weeks there, I ended up coming back to California, and then I gave birth to my son here in San Diego. And I moved in with my aunt and my mom in La Mesa, and I've been here ever since.
And so go back. Now, what was the final straw that gave you the courage to say that's it, and you moved out?
You know what? I just couldn't take anymore. I just couldn't take any more of the abuse.
Was it a daily occurrence?
It was a daily occurrence. It wasn't just one incident that made me move. It was just an accumulation of everything. And maybe all the crazy hormones that you go through when you're pregnant, I don't know. I just couldn't take any more. I was emotional already, and then just even more of an emotional wreck, with everything going on, and just taking beatings, verbally and the physical abuse did not happen while I was pregnant. It happened prior to being pregnant. Yeah. But the emotional and the verbal abuse that I was going through from when I got pregnant, and the I was something that he couldn't even look at me anymore. The thought of me with a stomach just made him sick to his stomach.
Really?
Yeah.
And he told you this?
Yes, he did. He just couldn't look at me anymore. He just couldn't look at me. So,
oh my God.
A lot of that was, just all built up. And then I moved in with his mother. And then from there, I came to San Diego, and then had my son Austin here.
And did he, what was my question I was thinking? Oh, were you trying to have a baby at this point?
No, we weren't trying.
I was going to say. Yeah. It didn't seem like this guy's somebody that would...
No, we weren't trying. And I'd actually filed for divorce in Colorado prior to me even moving back to San Diego, because I was just done. I was done.
Did you talk to your mom about this? Was she advising you? Did you confide in her?
Yeah, my mom was advising me as far as the legalities of it. We just didn't know. And I was actually asked, do you... By my attorney here in Colorado, she said, "Are you sure you want to file for divorce in Colorado if you're going to move back to California?" I said, "Yes, I just want to get it over with." I was young; I was like in my mid-20s, and she said, "Well, you have to understand that if he decides to try to get custody, that the courts have to stay here in Colorado. You can't move the courts to California if that's where you're going to be." I'm like, "Oh, he won't do that." I didn't think that he would. Moved to California, had Austin. 6 months later, he goes and he files for custody. And he had told me, he goes, "If you divorce me, I'll make your life a living hell." And he did. And he fought me for custody for years. Now, during this time, after my son was born, I started getting involved in this is when I started getting involved in my drinking was heavier. Started getting involved in drugs, and he made my life a living hell, yes, but I made it worse by what I was doing. And he fought me for custody, and he won custody of our son. And my son grew up in Colorado for 18 years and
Wow.
was never allowed to come to California. I would have to go to Colorado to visit my son if I wanted to see my son. So the drugs and the alcohol just skyrocketed in my life after I lost physical custody of my son. I was just done. The only thing that ever made me feel better was just being completely numbed out by whatever I could get my hands on at the time. And any time that I wanted to go see Austin, I had to fly to Colorado to go see him. And he just made that situation even much more difficult, more and more difficult. So another bit of advice, if you're going to file for divorce, which hopefully that no one has to ever go through what I went through, but make sure it's going to be in the state that you plan on living in, because it was really difficult.
Because that's what worked against you, huh?
Yeah, 100%.
And we both know at this, well, I know he did not want your son. It was just to spite you.
It was just to spite me. And, my son, when he was 13, was able to come out here one time. And when he did come out, now at that time when he came out, I was sober, but we'll talk about that part.
Yeah.
But he came out here, and then when he went back to Colorado, he told his dad, he goes, I want to move to California. And then his dad coerced him with all these other things and said he was going to promise him a truck, and got him to stay out there. But then when Austin turned 18, he moved to California. Austin is now 32, but he's been living here in San Diego ever since.
Wow. So did Austin ever tell you, like, as a child with him, was he abusive to Austin?
Yes, he was. Yeah. It was. I did fight in the beginning to try to get my son back, but then I felt like I didn't want to have to play this tug of war thing with him. And so when he was much younger, I know that Mike was a good dad. It wasn't until his later years, his teen years, that Austin was abused physically by his dad. And Mike was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And
I was going to ask that.
And he died of cirrhosis 2 years after Austin moved out here, when Austin was 20
Really?
years old. Yeah.
Wow. And so during this time, now what were you doing for work?
Well, at the time, I was a travel agent. I was working as a travel agent for years. I used to manage a very big travel agency here in San Diego called Costa Travel for about 16 years. So, yeah, I was in the travel industry for many, many years.
Wow. All right, so go back. So Austin here, now we're going to kind of reverse and go back a little bit, right? Because when did you said the drinking and this, that, we'll go back to that. Did it start before you were married?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So, like I said, in high school, I would drink. And then...
Yep. The majority do.
Yeah.
Party.
The majority do.
Yeah.
But there's a time when a lot of people change their behaviors to meet their goals. I was changing my goals to meet my behaviors. And that's because I believe that sometimes some people can have a drink every single day and not become alcoholic. And there are those people who drink maybe once a month and become alcoholic.
Yeah.
And alcoholism isn't about drinking a lot. Alcoholism is about, there's a physical component that's accompanied with alcoholism. There's a physical addiction. There's something physical going on. That's why when people say, well, why don't you just control the amount that you're drinking? Well, that's not possible with someone who's alcoholic, because once alcohol's in the body, we break out in what's called a craving. Yeah. So for lack of better terms or an example, it'd be like an allergy. So when I put alcohol into my body, at some time in my life, in my drinking, that allergy set in, and now I have this allergy that when I put alcohol in my body, I break out into a craving for more, like every other alcoholic. So there's alcoholism it's physical, mental, and it's also spiritual, obviously. So for years, I would, for a number of years after even high school and in college, I drank, but there was something different about the way that I drank than the way some of my friends drank. And some of my friends did drink like me too, that drank alcoholically too. And alcoholism and hard drinking are not the same thing. People who are hard drinkers and alcoholics were, at a certain time, the hard drinker can given sufficient reason, they can stop or moderate. I didn't have that ability to do that because addiction, alcoholism had set in at a very, very young age for me, in my early 20s. And so I was drinking. I was not drinking to have fun. I was drinking because I had to drink. So drinking was just something that I needed to do once I started drinking. So, through college, and then that's accompanied with trouble. So, where drinking starts out as fun, and then it's fun with problems, and then it becomes nothing but problems, because that's just where alcoholism takes you. So in my early years, when I was 19, when I was 18 years old, 17 years old, I'm sorry, my senior year in high school, I was crowned Miss Coronado. And then I'd gotten the scholarship and everything to go to San Diego State, and I went to San Diego State, and I basically had the world at my feet. I was given so many great opportunities to succeed in life. But like I said, I changed my goals to meet my behaviors, not consciously, but that's basically what I was doing, because to me, it was just easier to live a life of partying than it was to have to study and be in school. And so I dropped out of college. And when I did that, my dad moved me to Texas. He wanted me to move to Texas. I was living with a Coke dealer. My boyfriend was a Coke dealer. I almost lost my crown as Miss Coronado because my pageant director called me up and she's like, "We hear that you're doing drugs." And I'm like, "Oh, of course not."
This is when you were in Texas?
No, this is when I was here in San Diego.
Okay.
Still.
So
I hadn't gone to
Coke
Texas.
Dealer here.
Here in California. That's when my dad found out and then moved me to Texas. So then I moved to Texas, and he thought that maybe he can change my life and clean my life up. But, I just basically took my problems with me to Texas. And so now I'm living in Texas, and I'm beginning to find all these new friends that do the same thing that I do. And sure enough, just getting in the same trouble, and living with my father, who is a practicing alcoholic, drinking alcoholically. And it just, the two just didn't mix. The two didn't mix. So I moved out.
And so going back to 17, 18, Miss Coronado, were you doing drugs then or just alcohol?
I was doing drugs and alcohol then.
In your teens?
In my teens.
Okay, so get into that. When did this start? When do you remember, what led to it? Did it start with drinking, then a little pot, and then it led to this? Give me the whole...
Yeah, well, I never was much of a pot smoker. I went straight from drinking to Coke. I was doing a lot of cocaine, and it was prevalent in Coronado.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah. Back
in
in the
teens.
in the late 70s, in my teens. Late 70s.
15,
early
give me
80s.
How many teens? 3?
I would say probably 16, 17 years old.
People were doing cocaine at that age. It was very common.
Very common. Very common.
This is just, like when I hear stuff like this, it's crazy.
Very common in Coronado. Yeah.
And now we keep saying Coronado, I'm assuming because there's money there.
There's money there.
And where there's money, there's good drugs.
That's right. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's
I had a
exactly
guy
right.
on here that said he was actually a prior Crips gang member. He went to La Jolla Day. He said the drugs there were so great.
Right.
Way more than he had in his ghetto school.
Oh, for sure.
He said it was just whatever you wanted, you could get it, and it was the best.
Exactly.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, that's where the money is. So that's where the drugs are going to be. Yeah. So we got,
That's nuts.
Yeah. So we constantly, were every weekend looking and doing that. And
so
then,
were you up all weekend? When you go on a Coke binge, were you just up for 2-3 days? And how would you get to school on Monday?
So in high school, I didn't do it as much, but I was introduced to it at 16, then 17. Then we would just do it on the weekends. We would never do it during the week. It was always Friday and Saturday night.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'd stay up and we'd party all night and do whatever. And then when I graduated from high school, I was getting in so much trouble at home.
Did your mom know you were doing?
Oh no, my mom was extremely naive to everything. So she had no idea. it was easy to hide back then because it wasn't so much of a problem, but yet it was a problem.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I was constantly grounded. I was always grounded because I was always getting in trouble. I would always miss my curfew. Obviously, I wasn't home by 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock when I was supposed to be, and I was always grounded, and I was constantly getting in trouble. And I was dating a guy at the time when I was a senior in high school, and he was already in college, or he was out of school, and he lived in Coronado, and he had his own place. And then I was Miss Coronado, and then after that I graduated from high school, and then I moved out, and I still had to make appearances and do all these things as Miss Coronado had to do, and it was always such a challenge. And I never really wanted that title. It was something my mom wanted me to do. I was always kind of like the rebellious one. I was kind of the tomboy. I was always wanting to do things other than having to do anything that had to do with beauty, and that stuff just wasn't my gig, you know. But so the sooner that I could just take this crown off and not have to go on to be all these other pageants I had to go to, because Miss Coronado was a USA preliminary. So from Miss Coronado, you had to go to Miss San Diego, Fairest of the Fair. From there, went on to Miss California, USA, Miss Universe, and I just didn't want anything to do with that. My goal was to go have a good time, and I couldn't have a good time as Miss Coronado. I was constantly having to, keep my nose clean, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
My life was, living this wild life, and I didn't want to go to college. I just, didn't want to do any of that. So I just was never in class. And I met this guy who was a drug dealer, and then I moved out and I was living with him. And that's when my dad had said, enough is enough. You're moving to Texas. And so that's when I moved to Texas.
All right. Okay. So I wanted to go back.
After I gave my crown up. So
you gave it up?
I'm sorry. After I had given it, the year had come, and then I crowned the next Miss Coronado, and literally like days after that, I'd moved to Texas. My dad said, when you're done with your reign, you are moving here.
Because he knew what was going on.
He knew exactly what was going on.
Your mother didn't.
My mom didn't. My dad worked as a constable for the sheriff's department in Montgomery County, and so he was able to find records of people, and he could see who this person was that I was living with.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He had it. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you go to Texas, you meet up with other people, they're doing the same thing.
Yeah. And I'd go on a date, and my dad would run their license plates, and, yeah. So, and I would do the same. I was still running amok.
Yeah.
I was still running amok. So there was a time when I had moved out from my father's. My father, had his own problems at this time, he's with like wife number 5. And he had his problems. And wife number 5, her name's Lynn. I can mention her name because she's also sober to this day. But she was going to Al-Anon, and she was having problems with my dad and his drinking. And she was seeing that I was on the same path too. So for me, it was drinking and drugs. And
what's Al-Anon?
Al-Anon is for the family of the alcoholic. Adult children of alcoholics, the person who lives with the alcoholic, who's usually not alcoholic themselves, but sometimes they can be. So it's Al-Anon is for the families.
Got it.
So she was going to Al-Anon at the time, and then she was, approaching me about my problem. And she said, I really think you have a problem. And at that time, I was dating another guy who had said the same thing too. And, both kind of had this intervention with me, seeing where I was going. I was just living this life that was just out of control, coke all the time, drinking all the time. So when I was 20 years old, I went into NA and AA. I went to my first meeting. And from that point on, I stayed clean and sober for a year and a half, and was introduced to 12-step recovery at an early age when I was 20. And so from 20 to about 21 and a half, I was in the program for a year and a half.
Okay, and then what, did you relapse? What happened?
So yeah, I did. So the one thing about recovery, a lot of people that come in young, it's really hard for them to relate sometimes and to really understand what addiction is and what alcoholism is. And had I known what I know now, I probably would be sober, almost 40 years to this day. But because I was so young and I was in a room full of people in their 50s, and, sharing these stories of these things that had never happened to me.
Right.
I didn't lose a child in a divorce situation. I didn't get a DUI. I, hadn't, gotten in car accidents from alcoholism. I didn't live under a bridge. And I'm like comparing outside circumstances with something that's an internal problem. And so I'm like, I'm not like these people. I can go back out. I can drink. I'm fine. And so that's what I proceeded to do. And I started hanging around people. At the time I started doing these things. In Texas, it was a really big deal to do bikini contests. So there was I was part of these circuit girls, and we would do this circuit through Fort Worth and Dallas, and we would run these bikini contests all the time. So that's what I was doing. So I was living in bars. So I was basically living in bars, and I'd go to meetings during the day. Well, the two just didn't work.
No.
And especially because my friends were not, my friends in bars were different than my friends in meetings. And so I started living this life and doing these bikini contests, these circuits, and that's how I was making my money at the time. I was also working for Eastern Onion, singing telegrams, and I used to, just kind of like living this crazy life of that crazy, life that just always was so exciting to me. And I was in this circuit of people, and then next thing you know, I'm out finding dope, drinking again, and one thing led to another.
And so was it only Coke? Did you get into crystal meth, any heroin? Like, how far did this go? Are we getting there?
Yeah. That actually, So Coke was a little hard for me to find in Texas.
It's expensive.
And it was expensive, yeah. And so in Texas, it was called crank, which is the same thing as crystal meth.
Yep.
So I got really involved in using a lot of crank and then a lot of ecstasy. And this is when my experiment with just about everything, I was using everything other than putting a needle in my arm. So I had tried everything up to this point, other than heroin. I'd never done heroin. And so that would be my way of justifying, I don't have a drug problem.
Right.
I don't do heroin. Well, this whole life of living in with drugs and alcohol and living this whole just drug addicted life and around the people that I was with, and being in the bars and doing bikini contests, and then being told, you can make so much more money if you went and worked at the $1 Million Saloon.
Ooh.
So it sounded like such a great idea. And my boyfriend at the time was a male stripper.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. And so I decided, they said, you could make hundreds, even $1,000 a night if you worked in these places. And so next thing you know, I was a dancer for 4 years in Dallas. I worked at $1 Million Saloon. I worked at Lace. I worked at 2400 Club in Arlington, Texas. And that's what I did for a living. And that's what helped me justify, using and drinking, and just all came a part of it. And when I look back on this life, I get a little bit of anxiety because I realize I was so coerced by the enemy, and he had. It is truly the devil's playpen, that area, because in that lifestyle, because everything that you do, you are put on a pedestal and you're treated like a princess, like a queen, like a celebrity by doing and living that life.
Right.
And it all seems to be normal. It all seems to be okay. And you're making tons of money and...
Yeah, because you're basically worshipped and idolized, and you have money, so you can go out and buy your clothes, you can buy your shoes, and then you, correct me if I'm wrong, the justification of doing the drugs and the alcohol, it's part of your business.
Oh, managers would bring it to you. Yeah, they get it for you. Yeah. And I look at where I was going. So at 17, I had a life as in the pageant life. And in the pageant life, I went from being something that was supposed to carry moral character,
right,
and not just beauty, but moral character. And I was chosen because of the goals that I had, and the scholarships that I was given, and the life that I could have based on the education, and if I would have followed that path. But it's like I went from that to the complete flip side, and the other side of showing, of like basically it was, adult entertainment.
yeah,
And it was the complete flip side, where God could have had me, God wanted to give me this life, where I could, follow him and be upstanding a moral character, and could be an example to other
right.
girls. And here I was. It's not like when we're girls, when we're growing up, we're going, when I grow up, I want to be a dancer in Dallas. That's not something that I ever wanted to be. But drugs and alcohol took me down that avenue. And basically, I just bought the lie from the devil that, you're never going to be good enough to live up to that. But you know what? We'll put you on a pedestal if you live this life. And I literally bought the lie from the devil. And I didn't realize it at the time. But when I look back on it today, I see, and it gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
I look back and I see I was literally following a path down the wrong road.
Oh my gosh. Like you literally went the complete opposite.
Complete opposite. For 4 years of my life, I lived in that environment.
And you think back, like going all the way to childhood, and we know this, that your dad leaving, was a big part of this trajectory.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when you're a dancer, then you're idolized by men and worshipped over by men, and you're given everything, and you're just, everything comes your way.
Constantly seeking validation from men. Constantly seeking validation from men, in any way, shape, or form, because I never got that. And that's
right.
One of the things they say about fatherless daughters is that they usually end up with unwanted pregnancies. They usually end up in drugs and alcohol in their lives. They usually end up in broken marriages. And all three things had happened to me.
All three things.
All three things.
And an abusive marriage at that.
Exactly. And that's where I met my first husband.
That was where I was leading to. I was going to ask you, because I'm doing the timeline in my head as you're speaking, and I remember that you were married like mid-20s, low 20s, and I'm realizing, okay, we're there now. We're in that age group.
Right.
And I'm assuming, I was going to say, did you meet him? Like, your husband has to come in the mix at this point.
He met me in the club.
In the club.
Yeah, that's where he met me. Yeah.
And so what, did he come in often, and you were his girl? And
he wasn't someone that, he was someone that came in there like once or twice, and he came in with a friend that had known me. And at that time in my life, it was like right around 4 years of being in that environment. I remember thinking to myself, I can't be doing this the rest of my life.
I was going to say, when did it dawn on you, like, whoa, what am I doing? It
dawned on me. I was probably about 25. I'm like, I can't be doing this the rest of my life. Like, I can't see myself doing this forever. I've got to get out of here. I started to feel the depression. It's a depressing atmosphere. Yeah. Constantly, that's what you're doing. You're constantly just being around men that are only in there for one reason. And even though you're treated and put like a princess and up on a pedestal, you're really not.
Right. Yeah.
It's all a facade.
Yeah.
It's and you catch on to it after a while. And I was over it, and I was ready to get out, and I didn't know how I was going to get out. And at the time, he seemed like my knight in shining armor. Like he was going to get me out of this, and he was going to rescue me from living this life. And that's what I thought that he did, and we met. Long story short, ended up moving to Colorado, getting myself completely out of Texas.
Was he already living in Colorado?
He was already living in Colorado. He had a home in Colorado.
So why was he in Texas then?
He was there for, he sold exotic cars. And so he was there back and forth with someone who had a car dealership.
Got it. Okay. Now, did your dad know what you were doing at this point?
My dad had found out and completely disowned me.
How far into your dancing
I was probably
career?
a couple years into it, and when my father found out, my mom found out, broke her heart. Broke her heart. Broke my dad's heart too, when they found out what I was doing.
Both of them found out about a couple years in.
A couple years in, yeah.
How did it take them that long?
I don't know.
Because you must have had money. Like, hey, how the hell suddenly you have money?
Yeah, we didn't have cell phones back then. We didn't have internet, so
True.
it was easy to hide things for a while.
Yeah.
But then not for that long. Eventually they're going to find out. And so I think actually what had happened was someone had told her. A friend of mine had called my mom and told my mom what I was doing, and my dad, and told them both. Yeah.
Now, was this friend doing that to, like, in looking out for you?
It was no.
Or
It was
hating on you?
It was my boyfriend's sister who didn't like me. So
Oh.
yeah. So she had one up on me. So she got back
No
at me.
kidding.
Yeah. She didn't want me dating her brother.
This is the brother that
It was a dancer. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Oh God, that's funny. Now, okay, so going back to your quote unquote husband that pulled you out of here,
Yeah.
moved to Colorado. Mm-hmm. Like, what did he say? I don't want you doing this anymore, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, you were done.
Yeah, I was done, and he was like, well, I'll bring you to to Colorado, kind of like wanting to show me that we'd have a house, we'd have a normal life, we'd get married. 6 months after I'd moved there, we decided we're going to get married, and then when that happened, like everything just switched. Like all of a sudden, his personality switched.
Really?
Yeah, he got extremely controlling. He got verbally abusive. He got abusive, and just everything just kind of happened with the whirlwind. Once I had agreed to marry him, everything just kind of shifted, like a completely different person. I saw completely, because the person that I met was not the same person that I married. So,
And so prior to that, for the 6 months, he was not controlling. He wasn't abusive.
No.
At all.
No, not at all. He was fun. He was understanding. He was sweet. He was compassionate. And then all of a sudden, when I said that we would get married, and when I started to let my whole family know and everybody know that we were going to get married, it kind of just switched.
Wow, that's crazy, right?
Yeah, it was really weird. Yeah, it was. And I actually tried to back out of it. I tried to back out of it, saying I didn't want to get married, and I don't know. I don't know why I did.
I wonder if that's the MO of controlling abusive guys. Like, I wonder if this story's common. Because I always wonder, was he like that before the marriage? Then why did you get married? Maybe this is the reason. Maybe a lot of guys aren't.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
It could be possible. Yeah, it could be possible that they just put on a facade in the beginning of what they want, what they think you want to be, but then the real person comes out.
Then as soon as they lock you down, then they can just do whatever they want.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you tried to call it off. What happened when you tried to call it off?
So I tried to call it off, and then, I think that he just like pleaded and begged, and, we just decided to get married. I think I was so desperate at that time to just have my life change that I thought maybe he would change.
Yeah.
Maybe he would be different. Maybe things would be better.
Okay. Now, drugs and alcohol at this point, what was going on with this?
So I was still drinking. He said he didn't do drugs, but, I was still drinking at the time. He definitely drank. We both drank together. And so really it was more just alcohol. I was just doing a lot of drinking and, drinking on the drinking sort of changed. Like, alcoholism is very progressive for at least it was for me. So it wasn't something that was just like overnight. It wasn't like, heroin, boom, you're done.
Yeah.
It was over a period of time, which is why it's so cunning. It's easy for you to justify, that maybe there's not a problem here. But I started to see a problem. I started to see that, alcohol started changing me. The way I was drinking was a little bit different. I wasn't remembering things like I was before. Like I would have blackouts a little bit more commonly. And then after a period of time, it just progressively got a little bit worse. And I would try to find. It was hard to find drugs in Colorado because, like I said, like he didn't allow me to have friends. And he didn't allow me to socialize.
When did he lay down that law? How far in?
Oh gosh, from the beginning. I mean, it wasn't like he said I couldn't have friends. It was like if I would make a friend, say at the gym or he would just find a way for me to not hang out with them, or
chop them down. Like,
exactly.
You don't want to be around her. She's
exactly like even my work. Like I would go to work, and he sort of controlled where I would work too, because I went to travel school. After I got out of travel school, I applied to TWA Airlines and got a job as a flight attendant. And he wouldn't let me have that job because he didn't want me gone. So I had to take a job as a travel agent in Arvada, Colorado at the time. But it was an agency with only like 2 people, so it wasn't like a big agency where I would make a lot of friends. It was a small place with just a couple people, and he approved of that. So he was constantly not only controlling everything that I was doing, where I was working, where I was going. If I would go to the gym, he made sure he went to the gym the same time I did. So he was always had an eye over me.
Wow. Now, and then, so what? Now you got pregnant. How long into the marriage?
So I was about a year into the marriage. I got pregnant.
And at this point, he's being verbally abusive. Is there any physical abuse at this point? You said prior
to getting pregnant.
Yeah.
Prior to getting pregnant. So, I should have left. It's easy to say, hindsight's 2020. I should have left long before that. But I was so believing that this was the best I was going to ever have in life. He really had me convinced that I wasn't good enough to be anywhere else. He really had me convinced that I wasn't good enough for anybody else. That he was the best thing in my life. And I don't know how conscious he was of what he was doing, but I believe there was some consciousness of what he was doing and how he was manipulating me and making me believe. And you have to beat somebody down so many times before they, my self-confidence was just like zero.
Yeah.
I had no self-confidence. I didn't think that I had, I didn't feel pretty. I never felt confident. I felt stupid. And I just felt like this was the life I was supposed to live. I felt very trapped. And then it wasn't until I got pregnant that, maybe it was all the hormones going off. I just said, I got to get out of here. I'm going crazy. I was constantly crying every day. And then that's when I, packed up my stuff, moved into a women's shelter for a period of time. And then until my mother-in-law rescued me out of there. And then I lived with her for a little while. And then I just said, I got to get out of here. And I want to move to California. And I'm done with him. And this is like the whole time that I had moved out, he never was trying to come and get me, because I remember there was a time when I was sitting at his mom's house, and he walked up to his mom's house, saw me in the window, with my small little belly, and turned around and left, because he could not fight for someone that looked like me being pregnant. It was weird.
It was that bad.
It was that bad. He just did not want to look at me. And I know this also from his wife that he married after me. So years later, he remarried, and we became really good friends, because she was wanting to leave him too, but she was afraid to leave him at that time because she thought that he would do the same thing to their son, because they did have a son together. So Austin has a half brother. And she said the same thing, that he was just repulsed by her pregnancy.
And so this is just crazy, just nuts.
Nuts, yeah.
Now, when you found out you were pregnant, did he not want to have the baby?
No, he wanted me to have the baby. He just didn't want to look at me pregnant. So, everything about him was about appearance and how he looked, Yeah.
Wow. All right. So, okay. So where are we now? Now we're okay. So so what did you do? Did you call the women's shelter? How does that work?
Oh gosh, I think I just called a women's shelter. I probably looked
one
up in the yellow pages.
First?
No, I went because I didn't want him to know where I was going.
Yeah.
So I just remember I'd gotten up and I'd left, and I can't remember how my mother-in-law found me. I don't know if I had either called her or she'd found me, and then brought me, I was only I'm in the women's shelter for about a week, and then I was with her for a few weeks before I left and came back to California.
And then his mother.
His mom.
His mother knew that he was like this.
Yeah, she did.
How did she know? Did you tell her?
Oh no, she knew.
She knew
how her son was. Yeah, she would.
Did you call her for help? Did she call you?
When I was in the women's shelter, I don't remember how she'd gotten a hold of me or how she found out I was there. To be honest with you, I don't remember. It was either I called her or she found out somehow that I was there. But yeah, so she came and she rescued me from him, or from being there. But she had known, she would always say that, her son's a piece of constantly.
Really?
Oh yeah.
She knew. And so now, during this time, when were you doing drugs when you were pregnant?
The whole time I was pregnant, and with my three kids
time.
now, never did drugs.
Never
did drugs. Never. As a matter of fact, I believe that God made the thought of, or the smell of alcohol repulsed me. I got sick to my stomach.
Really?
Yeah.
So you didn't drink at all either?
No, didn't drink at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's crazy, actually.
It is.
So then, after you gave birth to your first son,
mm-hmm.
did the drinking and start again? Did it?
It did immediately. Well, not immediately, because I did breastfeed for a little bit, but then after that, after I was done, I just started. Then drinking became more important, and so then, of course, I stopped breastfeeding, and then, drinking, and then with that was accompanied by. You know what? I can't. This is when I was in California. I was actually living in La Mesa, so close to El Cajon, which at the time was the meth capital of the United States. El Cajon, California. And so it was really easy.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, okay, you know what? I want to lose a little bit of this baby weight, so let's get a little bit of meth. And so I was doing meth and drinking. Yeah.
Jeez. And then that's crazy, that El Cajon, right? Because I've heard Santee's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's everywhere now.
Yeah.
And honestly, the meth 30 years ago is not the same meth they're getting today. You know that, right? It's not it's completely different.
I've heard that, but what does that mean?
So, okay, so we'll jump ahead a little bit here.
Yeah.
Methamphetamine back in the late 80s, early 90s was all manufactured here in the United States.
Right.
So you'd always hear about these trailers that would catch on fire and burn out in Humul or wherever they were different areas out in Oklahoma. People would go cook meth or whatever. You just don't find that here because it's too hard to get the product to make it here. So one of my ex-boyfriends was a cook, the dancer, and then my cousin, her boyfriend, was also a cook.
Yeah.
So they just don't make it here anymore. It's now coming from over the border.
Really?
And they're bringing over the border, and it's not meth anymore. Everything now is laced with fentanyl.
Everything.
So you got meth laced with fentanyl, heroin laced with fentanyl. You've got, I've heard even marijuana's laced with fentanyl now. Everything's laced with fentanyl. But we can get to that and why is there fentanyl in everything right now? Well, there's a goal here. There's a goal to kill everybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And we're going to get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
So, so you got back to lose the baby weight. So go from there.
Yeah. So let's lose a little bit of baby weight.
Yeah.
We'll just do a little meth, right?
Yeah. That's perfect plan.
Yeah, whatever. Just ain't gonna hurt anything. Well, then it became, if I'm gonna get anything done, I need meth. Well, if I'm gonna go to work, then if I've gotta, if I'm just going to get up and wake up, I've got to. Well, then, now I've stayed up for 3 days. And so it's just.
So were you up for that many days?
Oh, sometimes I would be, yeah. Sometimes I would be up for days. I'd be up for days.
And you have your son at this point.
I have my son at this point, yeah.
When did the dad want to take the custody?
So I was, at this point, I was still living with my aunt and my mom in La Mesa. And so we were all one big happy family living in one house. And then I moved out and got my own place. And then when I got my own place, that's when Dad wanted to, Mike wanted to get custody of Austin. And so that's when he fought me. And he said, I don't even care what I have to do or what I have to go through. I'm going to get custody of him. And for no other reason than just to spite me.
Yeah.
So he really didn't have any idea what I was doing, which maybe this was God's way of protecting my son at this
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to actually believe that. And that's what I want to believe.
Yeah.
Because I was really in no condition to be raising a toddler or a little kid, actually a baby at this time. So Mike ended up winning custody. He had more money than me, right? The ball was in his court, Colorado. That's where everything took place. So Colorado judge is going to award custody to the parent living in Colorado, and that was Mike at the time, who had the most money. And so he awarded him custody. But I was awarded visitation, but I had to go to Colorado to visit my son. So when I lost custody of my son, when I had to get on that plane and take Austin to Colorado and drop him off at his dad's, and that flight home, I was wrecked. I was wrecked. I had lost my kid. I was completely wrecked. And I didn't even associate the fact that, maybe if I didn't have all these mind-altering substances in my system, I could have been a little bit more coherent to possibly win this case. But I believe that God was doing this to protect him, and I needed to go through what I needed to go through to get me where I am today, and to, and for 4 years of my life, I was a heavy meth user every single day of my life. There probably wasn't maybe but 7 days out of the 4 years where I didn't have meth in my system. I literally was 100% meth. I was that street tweaker, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I was that person that was just lost my jobs, and now in that period of time, I met my husband, who I'm married to today. So
during that 4 years.
During that
and this
4
is the 4
years
years after you lost custody.
This is that 4 years after I lost custody. So I was I met Brian, and Brian was. Well, let me back up one more.
Yeah.
So I was dating. I was dating before Brian, another guy named Brian, who was a Navy pilot, and I dated him for about a year, for a couple years, and then until he found out that I had a drug problem, and then he left, and then I met my Brian now, who is just a regular civilian, who had some really fun friends, who like to party a lot, and I'm like, oh, so nice to finally be with someone who accepts me for who I am and for what I do. And Brian is, my husband is an amazing man. He is truly a gift from God and was put into my life for a reason and for the person that I am today. And I'll get into that. But when I met Brian, Brian was just a fun-loving guy, and he had some really fun friends. And he didn't actually think that I would date him. He thought I was going to end up dating his best friend, who was like this Playgirl Model of the Year guy. He didn't think that he was even good enough to date me, which was kind of funny because I liked Brian way more than his friend. But we just started off with a really great friendship and a really great relationship, had a lot of really good fun times. Next thing you know, about a year later, I get pregnant. And we get married after my daughter was born. Our first daughter was born. So after she was born, by the way, during that whole pregnancy, I didn't use. So I guess yes, during that pregnancy, I didn't use, didn't drink. So.
But up in that point, you were doing meth. Did he know you were doing meth?
He knew I was doing meth, and
he
would, and he did it with me.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. On occasion,
yeah,
but not as much as I did. So,
and now when you're doing meth, are you snorting it?
Snorting it, yeah. So snorting it and eating it. So
eating it.
I'd eat and snort it, yeah.
Now, after 3, 4, whatever, how many years, is your nose just shot at this point? Is it burning? Is there a hole in it?
Yeah, totally shot. Yeah, I start having problems with my teeth. I start having problems with, but yeah, definitely. So. I have McKenna.
Did you lose your job, by the way? Did you say you lost your job?
I did. I lost one of my jobs. Yeah, I lost one of my jobs that at a travel agency that I was working at.
They knew you were just strung out. Yeah,
they just knew something was a problem. Yeah. So now by this point in my life, right? If we go back, remember I said when I was first in the program, I didn't have DUI.
Right,
Didn't lose
right,
a kid in
right.
a custody
There we
battle.
go.
Didn't get in a car accident. I had all those things. By this time, I had 2 DUIs. I've had, obviously lost my child in the custody battle, been in car accidents, and then some. And then a lot of other things had happened. A lot of other like crazy things. Meth is one of those drugs that is, if you want to meet Satan,
Do meth.
do meth, because you will meet him really quick. I want to fast forward because I don't want to spend too much time harping on what it was like, because it really is what it was like. If anyone's ever done it, there's never some good stories that come out of it.
What's the difference between meth and coke? Like, what's the difference in feeling? The difference in
coke comes from the cocoa plant, so there's a difference. Meth lasts longer. It's made with poisons, toxins, chemicals. It's horrible. Yeah. But coke is a high that just doesn't last as long, but you get high and then you come down. You have to do more of it. Where meth, you don't have to do as much of it. Yeah. But it wrecks your body.
Yes.
It wrecks your body a lot faster. It ruins your skin. It ruins your teeth. It ruins everything. Things start to deteriorate.
Because straight up chemicals.
Straight up chemicals.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So the last day, I remember this. So obviously, by this point, I'm 2 years in my marriage with Brian. My relationship with Brian. We're like 6 months into our marriage. We have a 6-month-old, a year and a half old daughter. And I'm at a point where I'm wanting to split up with Brian. We're just getting this huge fight. Just everything is in turmoil. And I don't really even have a reason other than just I'm a mess. And
so you got back on the drugs.
I was back on the drugs after McKenna was born. So just huge fights. I kick him out of the house, and he leaves, and then we're in this like separation. Like he's living somewhere else, I'm living somewhere else, and I'm at a place where I'm so paranoid, and I'm doing meth, and I'm like taking mirrors off the walls, thinking that there's cameras behind there. We live over a flight path in Lakeside, and I'm thinking helicopters. There's always helicopters going over. Yeah. I'm thinking they're after me. I'm pulling things apart. It's a total tweaker move. This is what tweakers do. And they just start getting paranoid. I'm shutting all the windows. I'm thinking I'm being tape recorded, and I'm just a mess. And I remember coming down my hill, like driving down one day, and I'll never forget this. I remember reaching out and praying to God and saying, God, please remove this from me. And I looked at my daughter sleeping, and I remember just crying and thinking, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And something told me to call Brian and tell him to come back and help me. And I picked up the phone and I called my husband and I said, I can't do this anymore. We got to get through this and I need your help. And sorry.
It's all good.
And he came home, and we held hands, and we sat on the couch together, and we prayed. And it was from that moment, and that time, the obsession and the desire to ever use methamphetamine left, and it was gone. And that was over 25 years ago, and I was way over. It was almost 30 years ago. It completely left me, and I was completely done, and I'd never used it again after that, ever since. But I said, I don't have a problem with alcohol. Alcohol's not my problem. It's always been drugs, so I don't have a problem with alcohol, so I can still drink. So we ended up getting back together, and and started going to church. We were going to Shadow Mountain Community Church at the time, which is a Baptist church, and things were going well, and for a while, and drinking was just something that we both do, something that he can do, and it was something that I thought I could do too. And so I began to, just drink on a regular basis, and then much more regular and much more regular. And the signs that I was seeing in my first marriage of drinking started coming back, and I started having blackouts. And so I drank continuously for about the next, 15 years. I don't even know. And I don't know when it was or what happened, but there was a time in my life when that physical component that I was talking about that's part of addiction or alcoholism took over. I couldn't tell you the day. I couldn't tell you when. I just know that sometime in between that day that I stopped using meth, and by the time I was 42 years old, that somewhere in between there, it just got really foggy, but alcohol just played a major role in my life, and then it played a necessary role in my life. I had to drink. So my drinking went from maybe every day after work at 5:00 I'd have a drink to and then all of a sudden, well, I'm going to not have this, I'm going to quit this job because really the job was getting in the way of my drinking.
Wow.
So then I thought, well, I just need a job where I can work from home. So then I tried real estate with my husband, and that didn't work. And then I tried being a travel agent from home, and that didn't work because alcoholism. Now when it was okay to drink at 5:00 when you got home from work, now it was okay to drink at 12:00. And now it was okay to drink at 10:00. And then it became okay. Then work just got in the way, and now it was okay to drink when I woke up.
Wow.
Because I had to drink. And then this is progressively what happened over those umpteen years, however long it was, until I was 42. And drinking just progressively got worse. It got worse and worse to where it wasn't something that I wanted to do anymore. I would wake up and say, I don't want to drink. I don't want to drink. God, please, I don't want to drink. And, I'm a Christian at this time. So just know that, just because I believe in Jesus, there's believing in Jesus and complete reliance on Christ are two different things. I believed in Jesus. I believed that my, if I were to die the next day, my soul would be taken to heaven. I know that I would be with Christ. But there's something about not giving everything to God, and you can't do that when you're living in addiction. You can't do that when your God is a liquid, and you can't do that when your God is anything other than God. And I made alcohol my God, and alcohol became that abusive relationship, just like I had in my first marriage, because it would beat the crap out of me. But yet every single time I'd go back to it, knowing every time, and that's insanity.
Yeah.
I wasn't it wasn't working for me anymore. I didn't want to drink anymore. I had to drink. There was a need to drink. I needed to drink every day because I was physically addicted. I now did not metabolize alcohol like my husband metabolized alcohol. Something happened to me every time I put alcohol into my body that I broke out into a craving for more. And now I would wake up in the morning, or I'd wake up in the middle of the night and start DTing and having to go down the hallway and find something where I could put into my body, whether it was, sometimes it was cooking sherry, sometimes it was mouthwash, whatever I could find to relieve, to give myself a little bit of sense of peace and comfort for a moment, so I wouldn't detox.
Wow. Crazy.
It got really bad.
Wow. And what was Brian doing at this point?
Well, so constantly, every morning I'd wake up and he would say, do you remember what you did last night? Do you remember what you did last night? Brian is the perfect codependent Al-Anon husband that he was supposed to be. He didn't want anyone to know that there was a problem. So he constantly would cover for me, constantly covering for me. Instead of letting me hit my bottom, he constantly covered for me because he didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
He didn't want to look bad. And he didn't want, and if I looked bad, he looked bad. So he constantly was like covering for me and making sure that nobody knew what happened to Leanne last night, until he stopped doing that. And he let me hit my bottom. He let me get to a place to where it was just, the end, the end for me. I needed to. He didn't know that that's what I needed to do in order for me to quit. Everybody's bottom looks different.
Yeah.
So here was my bottom. So I'd gotten into a few. Obviously, I'd gotten the DUIs. I already told you about that. I don't want to go into that much trouble. But the last day that I drank was second to last day. My father and I decided we wanted to go to the VFW hall in Alpine, and my kids had soccer practice. So they were young at this time. I think they were like 9 and 11. Took them to soccer practice in Alpine, and then my dad and I ended up going to the VFW hall to drink, just like whatever his soccer mom does.
Yeah.
She goes and drinks while her kids are at soccer practice.
Right.
At least that's what I thought. So went to go pick up my kids, got them in the car, and something happened, and I blacked out. And all I remember was screaming. And the next day I woke up not remembering what had happened, and I was freaked out. And my dad had to tell me this time, because before it was always Brian asking me, do you remember what happened last night? And this time my dad said, you blacked out at the wheel and we almost killed all of us. And so I had to drive home. But he was trying to cover. He's like, but it's okay. We'll make sure that doesn't happen next time. And by this time, I was like, I almost killed my family. I almost killed my family. And I was so freaked out. The next day, I told Brian, I go, you know what? I'm going to go get help. And he had heard me say this a million times, and so he didn't believe it. And so I went to drive to my first AA meeting in like 20 years. And instead, I drove to a parking lot and drank because I was too scared. And then the next day, I said, okay, I've got to go. And so finally, I walked into my first AA meeting on November 9th, 2005. After not having a drink that day, and it was a women's meeting in Lakeside. And these women took me in and talked to me and loved me up. and I just remember that it was a little bit of a different AA meeting, but I knew that's where I needed to be, and I knew that's where I needed to go. And this one woman took me under her wing, gave me her phone number, and then I would call her every single day. And it was from that day on that I've never taken a drink since. And that's my sobriety date, November 9th, 2005. And I haven't had a drink since that day. Since the day that I realized that I almost killed my family. Because, I would wake up and black out some nights.
Yeah.
I would wake up and I would find myself in a part of the house. I'm like, how did I get here? Like, and then I would think, what if I stabbed someone in the middle of the night? I wouldn't even know if I did that.
Right.
And now I didn't even realize that I'd almost killed my family, and I was getting behind a wheel. Not only my family, I could have killed somebody else. So for me, that was my bottom. It was a number of things leading up, especially the blackouts and not remembering those things. And listen, blackouts aren't necessarily something that mean that it just means too much alcohol. Right.
Way too much.
Yeah, it means way too much alcohol. But for me, it was happening on a daily basis. And that was just the final straw for me, to know that I potentially could have killed my kids, my dad, myself, and somebody else. And so that was the last day. And then from that moment on, I was going to meetings and I was doing all this stuff. And then I was going to celebrate recovery. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, this will be great because now I can go to Bible study and I could be a normal person in church that goes to Bible study. And I was kind of really excited to live a life of how a Christian should live a life. And, I was just not drinking, and I was, going, just doing the things that I thought I was supposed to do. Believing in God, but not fully relying and turning everything over to God. And I thought that just removing the alcohol was the answer. Just removing anything mind altering was the answer. But I'm going to tell you that that's not what happened. My life wasn't living happily ever after. I removed the alcohol, and removing the alcohol is just scratching the surface.
Yep.
It's just the beginning, because now I'm living with the problem. Because now I've removed the alcohol. See, the alcohol was numbing the problem.
Right.
The alcohol was numbing the abuse. The alcohol was numbing the rape. The alcohol was numbing all the other problems, the lack of the father in my life. The alcohol was numbing all that, and I didn't have to think about that. Now you remove the alcohol, and I had nothing to replace it with. I didn't know that God could take that over. I believed in God, but I wasn't making that connection. I wasn't part of a community of people that was showing me that the Holy Spirit was here to be my helper. I wasn't part of a community like that. I was part of a community I would go to AA meetings where we couldn't really talk about Jesus, but so I would go to Celebrate Recovery where we could talk about Jesus. And I was learning scripture, and then I'd go to my AA meetings and I would talk about my problems, and just there was a missing component. I couldn't figure out what it was. My relationship at home, you would think that everything would be better, and just things got worse, and nothing was like everything. There was this just turmoil after turmoil, and I had nothing to fix it with. And I kind of had this holier than thou attitude, like, well, I'm not drinking, so everybody needs to treat me better. I had this sort of sense of entitlement, like I'm entitled for you guys to love me and appreciate me because look how good I'm doing. I'm not drinking anymore. Attitude.
Yeah.
And that's not where God wanted me, but I didn't know. I had no one or nowhere to lead me to turning everything over to God. And we have these amazing steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We use them at Awaken Recovery, which is what we do.
Yep.
The same steps. We admit we're powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. Easy thing to do, right? Second is that I have to come to believe that God could restore me to sanity. Of course, I believe that. And then the next is I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. Okay, this is where I trip up. I can turn my alcoholism and drug addiction over to God, but you know what, God? I'm just going to run my life the way I know to run life. I'm not going to turn my finances over to you, my romance, my marriage, I'm going to manage that. And that's where I got tripped up, not knowing that. So I was running amok for 4 years in sobriety. I had 4 years clean and sober, and I was at a place at 4 years sober where I wanted to commit suicide.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. My husband and I were at each other's throats. We were fighting. We couldn't get, he was sick of me. I was sick of him. I left. I moved out, got an apartment, started just hanging around people in the program and thinking that that's what I need. I just need to, be with someone in the program. And I got to a place in my sobriety where I'm 4 years clean and sober. I have this apartment. My kids want nothing to do with me, and I wanted to kill myself. And I remember contemplating on how I was going to do it. Brian said he wanted to talk to me, and I was going to let him pick me up in the car, and we were going to go talk, and I was going to make sure we were on the freeway, and I was going to throw myself out the door. I'd already planned it. And then I got a phone call from my therapist who I was seeing, and she had said, listen, you need to go do something, go to a meeting. I know you're contemplating suicide. It was the craziest thing. I know you're contemplating this. You need to go do something. Moments after, I got a call from a friend of mine. She goes, there's this woman I want to hear you speak. She's speaking at this meeting. I wanted nothing to do with this. I really wanted to kill myself. 4 years sober with nothing in my system. I was contemplating on how I was going to get out of my life. And this is a perfect example of not bringing God into your life. Belief is not the same thing as complete 100% reliance and surrender to Christ. It's not the same thing. You need belief before you can do that. But I had never really totally done that. So I went and heard this woman speak, And when I heard this woman speak, I'd never heard recovery like this in my life. I was 100% blown away. And I knew at this moment that God had brought me to this meeting to hear this woman speak on recovery, because she was telling my story. She was talking about how she was sober and how she was suicidal and how she wanted to kill herself, and it was right where I was at. And I remember sitting there just breaking down in tears. And after the meeting, I went up and I went to go talk to her, but she had this line of people, and I wanted to go talk to her, and I wanted to, I wanted her to rescue me. And so when I went up to her, I asked her if, like, what meetings does she go to? And she told me, and so I stalked her. I stalked this woman. I wanted her to sponsor me. And I asked her if she would sponsor me, and she said she didn't have time. She tried to pawn me off on someone else. I said, I'm going to keep stalking you because I need what you have, because I'm about to die. I'm about to die. So she took me through this work. She took me through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, word by word, line by line. And everywhere where it was higher power, which is so crazy because it's not mentioned that much in the big book. She showed me where Christ was. She showed me where this whole book is written. It's all Christ based, and it's crazy how today in the rooms in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, how they don't want you to talk about Christ when that's what the whole big book was. Their whole Bible, which is the big book, it's Jesus's fingerprints all over that book, all over the steps. I can show you a scripture for every step. The first step is we admitted we were powerless over our addictions, that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, Paul said in Romans 7:18, for I know that nothing good lives in me that is in my sinful nature, for I try to do what's right and I can't carry it out. I couldn't carry it out on my own power.
Yeah.
I needed God's power. Steps 1 through 12, every single one of them are about humility. We just learned about this, and we just heard a pastor talk about this at Sunday service. Humility, being broken down in my ego. Every single step, I didn't see that. I didn't see that step 3 was breaking down my ego, surrendering everything over to God. There used to be this bumper sticker that said, God is my co-pilot. That was my problem. God's been my co-pilot. He needs to be my pilot. He needs to be flying this plane. I have no business running my life. I have no business flying. I need to be back helping the passengers. I have no pilot's license. He needs to fly this plane. I am in for destruction every time Leanne tries to run her life, and she doesn't let God run her life. She doesn't let God put God first in every area. And I went through this work with this woman, word by word, line, but I never got closer to God. Like, I believe 100% that God brought me to AA, but I believe that AA brought me closer to Jesus than ever before. And I went through this work. I began to understand the powerlessness in first step. I began to understand what alcoholism was. I had to get that right. I had to understand what it was, and did I have that, and what did it mean to be that. I understood 100% that I was, and that I had to believe in God. Step 4 is to surrender everything over to Christ, surrender everything. And then I can go into inventory. Inventory 4 and 5 are like confession. 6 and 7 are sanctification. 8 and 9 are reconciliation, making amends, right? 10 is redoing all that over again. 11 is prayer and meditation. And 12 is evangelism, going back out and giving what was so freely given to me. And I wasn't doing that either. I wasn't doing any of that. All I was doing was just sitting my butt in a meeting and taking in, and not giving back, because I had nothing to give back. I wasn't shown properly how to do that, and how I could give back all those 12 steps that were so freely given to me, and having an experience with it, not just doing it, having an experience with Jesus, unlike an experience I've ever had before, something completely different than just an experience in church, because I was an alcoholic. Today, I don't identify as an alcoholic. I am a recovered alcoholic. I am recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body where my body was, to who I am today. I'm a new creation in Christ. And what I have, there's never been a mistake from that day that I went through that work with that woman, who is today still my sponsor, name's Tyler Colton, that there's never been a mistake or a hesitation in my life. What my direction and what my path is that I'm supposed to be going out and helping other alcoholics and other addicts, and being able to share my story and let them know that it's okay, and that God can take, and that God has if you just let God have complete control of your life, you could have the amazing life that I have today. I mean, the career that I have today, my life, my family, the things that we're able to do. God blesses me so that I could be a blessing to other people today. I mean, this is, I sometimes I just don't even ask for it, and then God just dumps something amazing on me. I'm like, okay, all right, who am I sharing this with today?
Wow.
It's just amazing, but had I not listened to the Holy Spirit that day that said, go to a meeting and go listen to this woman, I would have not been in the direction that I had been in, that I am in today, and learned the things and had the experience that I had that was just so, that had just revolutionized and changed my life, brought down those walls so that I could have this amazing contact with the Holy Spirit that I have today.
And your therapist said, hey, was your therapist a big part of that? Said,
yeah,
hey.
she was. Yeah. Oh, right? Definitely. Yeah. God's very organized,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, yes.
God's super organized in how he plants people, and in your life so that he can direct you to where he needs you to go. Because, our will trumps God's will, right?
Yeah.
But he knows that if he could just plant this person and this person, that maybe what will happen was the direction and the pattern of my life completely changed from possibly doing something to myself, or destroying my whole family.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't need alcohol to do that. I was doing it without alcohol and drugs because I was doing it without Jesus. I was doing it without God. I was living like an agnostic, right? Agnosticism is just a belief in something, but there's no reliance on it, right?
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that what I was? I was like a present day agnostic. Even though I claimed to be a Christian, I had no dependence on God. I had no contact with the Holy Spirit. Then I get dumped into this church, this Awaken church, where my first experience at Awaken.
Yeah. How did you get to Awaken?
So I had gone from Shadow Mountain. Well, my kids had always been in Christian schools. So that was one thing that I always made sure that they did. I always made sure that they were in Christian education. And so they were at Christian High, and from Christian High, they actually heard Pastor Jurgen come and speak at chapel one time, and I guess he wasn't supposed to talk about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, but he did.
Oh, really?
And so, he never got invited back. That's what he told us. And I remember my kids telling me, this pastor came and said that you can lay hands on people and heal them. And I remember Christian High is very Baptist, so they don't believe in that. You give the gifts of the Holy Spirit to a Baptist is like giving a Ferrari to an 8-year-old. They're not going to know what to do with it.
Right.
So, so they didn't know how to answer that. And so Brooke would always ask the question after Pastor Jurgen came and spoke at chapel, well, why can't we lay hands on that girl that's sick and just pray that she be healed? And she would always get sent to the office, and I would be like, why is my daughter being sent to the office? It was all because of that. So because my kids went to Christian, so they always led us to the churches that we would go to. So we went to the Rock, and then from the Rock we came to what was at the time C3.
Yeah.
And the first time that I sat in C3,
which is now Awaken.
Which is now Awaken. I heard Pastor Jurgen preach on a sermon. I still remember it to this day. It was David and Beersheba. It was, 6 years ago?
Okay.
Somewhere around 6 years ago. And I remember sitting there and feeling the Holy Spirit, not knowing what I was saying. I grabbed my husband's hand and I said, this is a Holy Spirit-filled church. We're not going anywhere. We're staying here. And it took him and Brooke a while to really catch on.
Yeah.
Because my oldest daughter, McKenna, and I, we were in. We're like, we're not going anywhere. This is where God planted us here for a reason. And then now, obviously, we are planted here.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
So this is I'm speechless here because just what you said, how you're no question, you're calling, why you're here. to share your story, your testimony, and then hence, when I saw you on stage, and that's because of Awaken putting you on stage, right?
Right.
To tell your story, a very small 5 minutes of your story, which is what I think it was, 5-10 minutes at the most.
Yeah.
And that was enough for me, or for God, to highlight you to me and be like, whoa, okay, she's got to come on. She needs to share this testimony to a lot more people.
Yeah, I think it's the initial methamphetamine and alcohol that kind of gets everybody every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it just goes to show you that you can't judge a book by its cover. And sometimes you don't know who you're sitting next to in church. Maybe that person needs help, and maybe they sit next to you and they think, oh, that person would never know. Now people know, that my calling, from that day that I feel that I was recovered, after being 4 years sober, the day that I totally qualify myself as a recovered alcoholic and addict is the day that I understood my truth, and I understood that my calling is to always share my testimony and always be there to help the other alcoholic or addict who needs help, and to do whatever I can. And I know that there's times when sometimes I'm on the phone and I'm calling McAllister and I'm calling all these detoxes and I'm just doing all this stuff just literally out of the move of the Holy Spirit that's doing this through me. And I'm finding a place for someone to get medically detoxed, or I'm trying to find where someone is that's suicidal, or and I'm usually just on a hunt and persistent, and I know that it's just a move of the Holy Spirit, because I know that's my calling, is to be able to save lives. And now more than ever, we are not living in the same times we were living in 3 years ago.
3 years, only 3.
Well, fentanyl's been around for a while.
Get back to the fentanyl thing.
Fentanyl's been around for a while. It's been around since the early 2000s, probably right when I first got, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And then it started to get a little bit more prevalent. I'd say maybe 6 years ago, you started hearing a little bit more of it.
Yep.
A little bit more of it. In the last 2 years, so when COVID hit, everything shut down. Right. Everything shut down. Oh, except dispensaries and topless bars. Those were still open.
Of course.
Because those are necessary, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So everything shut down, including
liquor
meetings.
Stores.
Liquor stores got to stay open because that's necessary too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So meetings shut down. So all of us that, our community of recovered and recovering addicts and alcoholics, that shut down. So Zoom opened up, so we were able to Zoom. But then what we noticed was for a period of time, there was really nowhere. Zoom was okay for a period of time, but Zoom does not take the place of actually meeting one-on-one with your fellow, homies.
Yep.
Right? So I noticed what was happening was they started reporting a lot more deaths from fentanyl.
Right.
And I'm thinking, who's doing all this fentanyl? Well, what's happening is fentanyl isn't just something that people are doing, they're just deciding to do. It's because methamphetamine's laced with fentanyl. And the two biggest drugs in San Diego are hard drugs, are meth and heroin.
Yes.
Both being laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl coming from China coming to the cartel bringing it over. But now we got open borders.
Yep.
They're just open.
Yeah.
And no one's checking anything, so it's really easy to get drugs. It's really easy to get drugs right now. The fentanyl overdoses in San Diego, just San Diego alone, prior to COVID, were about 3 a year. And when COVID hit, they were 3 a day in San Diego alone. I don't know what it is today, but this was about 7 months ago. I heard this statistic. There was 3 a day of dying, just San Diego County. Yep. San Diego alone. So we're dealing with a different thing. This is different now. If somebody goes out and relapses, it's Russian roulette today.
Yes.
We're dealing with something different. Where I'm dealing with something I've never experienced. A lot of people that've got, I got 17 years, almost 17 years clean and sober. We don't know what fentanyl is. Well, I don't even know what a craft beer tastes like, but that's another. But there's some things that we've never experienced, so we don't know what we're dealing with. just recently we had a guy that we found. God just brought me to him. He'd been MIA for a period of time. He was at our church. He'd been MIA. He went back out and found out he was not doing heroin anymore, but he was doing straight fentanyl. Found him. Literally, we found out that he was still alive. I'm like, where is he? He goes, he's somewhere off in El Cajon. I went and looked in my car, couldn't find him, got my whole church to pray, went on the group. He said, everyone, we need to find him. He's still alive. They started praying. 5 minutes later, his dad calls me. We got my son. Within 24 hours, God made it possible for us to get him into medical detox. And he's medically detoxed. He's got like close to 2 months right now. But when he talked to me about fentanyl, I asked him, I go, what is this? He goes, with heroin, when you go out and you do heroin, you're always chasing that same high.
Yeah.
With fentanyl, it's the same high every time. And it's so highly addictive, but it also kills. The amount that they're putting in, even pill form, I mean, it will kill you. It has been. It's been killing people. Nationwide, I don't even know what the numbers are. But the real pandemic, is fentanyl. It's not COVID. It's fentanyl.
Yeah.
And nobody's saying anything about it. CNN doesn't have a ticker, a fentanyl ticker, like they did for COVID. Why don't they put a fentanyl ticker up there? Because maybe somebody would do something about it, or maybe they just don't want anyone doing anything about it. But literally, this is an epidemic right now. It's horrific how many people I've lost in the last 2 years, how many friends I've known who have died because they went back out and drank. But then that drink led to meth, and then they died. That drink led to heroin, and they died. That smoking pot led to whatever, and then they died. And it's happening every single day right now.
Yeah, this fentanyl thing is because it's getting into the schools, young kids. It's becoming a major thing here.
Oh, it's
major.
It's horrific what we're seeing just in the rooms, the 12-step rooms, secular rooms. You know, we're hearing on a daily basis of how many people are just dying.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and again, the real
epidemic.
That's a real epidemic.
And because it's so addictive.
Yeah.
So doing coke or meth or whatever, but once it's laced with fentanyl, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, game over.
I now am sponsoring girls that went back out 3 years ago on drinking and then meth, and now I'm dealing with fentanyl. Now they're in detox, they're on Suboxone because they have to be on Suboxone because they have to detox off something.
Are you a part of the Awaken recovery as well?
I lead Awaken Recovery at the El Cajon campus.
You do?
Yes, my husband and I do.
And give me something about Brian. How's Brian been throughout this whole journey? Give me.
Brian is a saint. My husband is, for someone to put up with me, I compare it to what was that show, Forrest Gump. You know how amazing Forrest was, how good-hearted he was and loving. I'm Jenny. Yeah, he's Forrest Gump. Seriously, the man is a saint. He has worked with so many people on the other aspect of things, on those who are the Al-Anons, those who are the enablers, those who are the ones who are codependent on the one who is dependent. So he has an amazing program. During that time that I told you, our 4 years, obviously I wasn't working a program and neither was he. And then when I found this woman who took me through the work, she also found someone to help take him through the work for what he deals with.
Yes.
See, he didn't think he had a problem. He's like, she's the problem. I'm here for her. And then someone said, no, let's figure out what your problem is. And so he was able to go through the same 12 steps, but for what he, for codependency or for love addiction or whatever you want to call it, Al-Anon issues.
Yep.
So, and he's been able to pass that on to other people. So it's a great mix for the two of us because not everybody that comes into Awaken Recovery isn't just for substance abusers, obviously.
Right.
Although the El Cajon campus, we have the majority are substance abusers, but we have a lot of people that come in that are family members of the substance abuser. That's why it's really great to come to Awaken Recovery with your significant other, your husband, your wife, and if you are that person on the other end, we have someone there and a way to help you too.
Right. And so, okay, so let's land the plane and finish with this. Anybody that's watching right now that's either going through addiction, let's say they're going through, or they're maybe in denial. What is it? Is it a denial thing? Like,
sure.
Do they know they're in it and they're just like,
yeah.
Or let's say they have a family member. What do they do? What's the first thing they do from right now at this point?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to reach out to somebody. Yeah, you have to reach out. And I would say come Sunday night at 7 p.m. to the El Cajon campus, or go Tuesday night, 7 p.m. to the Balboa campus, or go Monday night to the San Marcos campus. We have Awaken Recovery at all those campuses on all those evenings. But if you can't wait, you can contact AA hotline, Alcoholics Anonymous. Just call the hotline. They'll help direct you to at least a meeting to get you somewhere where people are clean and sober, where you can get help. But I highly recommend also reaching out to a Christ-based recovery.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
People have been going through the program.
Right.
It's not sticking. It's not working.
Right.
What about them?
Yeah, definitely come to that's why I mentioned those 3 times and those 3 days is try to reach out to Awaken Recovery and meet us. And can I give my phone number out?
It's going to be all over your stuff. But
okay.
Yeah, if you want to give it out, you can give it out.
Yeah. So if you are feeling like you need help and you're feeling like you need someone to talk to, like you're not sure if you have an addiction problem, you're not sure if you have an alcohol problem, call my number 619-368-9944. Send me a text. 619-368-9944. Text me first, and then we'll call, and then I'll know that you reached out from this podcast. But if you have questions, if you are concerned, if you feel like you're lost or you just don't know where to go, send me a text. I wonder if my phone's going to blow up. It's okay.
It's not
okay.
live. It's not live.
Okay. Send me a text, and I will be more than happy to call you back, and we can chat.
And single guy, she's married. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
This isn't a hookup line now.
No.
This is a recovery line. We're going to have to fight him off.
Yeah. And typically what we do too, like, so if there's a guy, I usually don't sponsor guys. But if there is a guy, we'll direct you to the right male version of what you're dealing with for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. So, Leanne, this has been incredible. I mean, your story is unreal, and I loved watching you share it because you started to light up at the end, and your passion came through of how much you care and how much you genuinely are in your calling now of why God put you here. You're a very special human being. God definitely had a plan with you. He didn't want to see you go. That's for sure. So he made sure, as you said, he's very strategic and very planned out, and knew he put certain people in your life to make sure that you made it through, so that you can come out the other side and do this amazing work that you're doing now. And then therein lies, then he put me in your life and you're in mine, so that we can get this story out there even more. Because even if we can change one person's life that watches this or listens to it or has a family member, then we've done our job here today. So, Leanne, I thank you so much. It's been an honor. I really appreciate you being completely vulnerable and transparent. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Leann Yarbor, Real Deal Talk. That's a wrap, baby.